right, good evening, everyone. This is David Mikey and Fernando de Urioste with another session of Cirkiel Town Hall. Tonight we're looking at discrimination based on race at AISD, as well as discussion of the Schoolhouse to Jailhouse pipeline and use of Title VI and the Civil Rights Act as one of the tools. We're going to vary a little bit from our format because normally Fernando and I are your co-hosts and we tell bad jokes and bad puns and other things to get us through the hour. But because of the serious nature of the conversation we are having in terms of the structural racism we have in our nation, specifically here to Texas and AISD, I'm going to turn over to our fearless leader and senior attorney at the law firm, Marty Cirkiel. Go from there.
Well, when I was a little boy and we watched television, every once in a while, they were all live shows and they would look into the camera and say to everybody, hello out there in TV land. Well, that's what this is kind of like. There's a whole bunch of folks out there in video Zoom land that we can't see, I can't see, but I assume you're there and thank you for being here tonight. It's a very, very serious topic. Very briefly, I'd like the folks that are here to introduce themselves. I see, we'll start with the people who's showing. So I'm going to ask Kameron if you can introduce yourself first, tell a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, hello everybody, and Martin, thank you for having me here. My name, again, is Kameron Johnson. I am currently the Chief Juvenile Public Defender here in Travis County, where our office, we have a group of 11 lawyers where we represent youth who are charged with criminal offenses. We do approximately well over 95% of all the juvenile delinquency cases in Travis County. And so that's all the way from the most minor to the most serious offenses. And with the group of 11 lawyers, we have been in an existence for many years. In fact, our office has been operating since 1971. So we are the oldest juvenile public defender office in the country, and thereby being the oldest in the state of Texas. And we do exclusively juvenile cases.
Okay. And as we get a little bit further into this, we're going to talk a bit more, in fact, a lot more about the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, okay? And this is kind of a segue. So as many of you know, that there is a division of when people go from juvenile court to adult court. Many states have changed from 17 to 18. Texas still has people from 17 moving on to adult court. And one of the things I'm going to ask Skip Davis to talk about in a little bit when he after he introduces himself, but much later fully, is about the role of the attorney in representing students of who are between 17 and 21 who go to high school. And of course, in the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, there are disproportionately young men and women of color. So Skip, if you can introduce yourself a little bit, tell everybody a little about your background and what you're doing now. You know, I may have given it away. You're on mute. You take the mute off.
You know, I'm an amateur, I suppose. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this forum. My name is Edmund Skip Davis, and I've been an attorney now in Central Texas for about 20 years. Prior to my becoming a lawyer, I was an infantry officer in the U.S. Army, and so I've got a unique perspective that I bring to the table when I come to lawsuits and intervene in these matters that involve near juvenile circumstances. I have a small firm that I operate with two other lawyers, and we call it the Land Shark Law Firm.
By the way, real quick, Skip, before I forget, do you guys do any civil work or just criminal work?
I do civil rights work, 1983 work as well. I'm not as prolific as you, Mr. Cirkiel, but I'm trying to come along and on your coattails, certainly.
Well, I'm older than you. Before I forget, David was a Marine. So, so he brings also that kind of unique skill set that ex-military do. Ms. Dickerson, can you share with us a little bit about who you are and your hip component, both personally and professionally, I might add. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Great. Thanks for inviting me to participate in this discussion. I am a law professor at the University of Texas at Austin, but I teach both law classes and also undergraduate classes. My current research focus is on economic disparities based on race and also based on class. And I am here in both sort of two capacities. First, I'm a parent of two Black males who attended Bowie High School. And second, I'm also, on behalf of the law school, I am chairing a committee that is tasked with responding to the most recent killings of Black men and women and the protest and to propose programmatic changes at the law school.
Okay, very good. I'm texting Nelson right now, so give me a second. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about why we're here tonight. And for a moment, I'm going to jokingly say we're going to start at the end. Oh, I forgot somebody. Ms. Park.
Yes.
There you go. Who's with you today?
Yes. So first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Marty, also for including us in this. I am here. I am Pamela Park Sneed, and here with my husband, Charles Sneed. So he is here, Marty. He just logged on with me. And forgive me for not doing video. I just had a medical issue, and so we just had made it back to the house. So I'm still participating, but in bed. So I'm a parent of a senior, a 2020 graduate at Bowie High School. Her name is Kameron Sneed. And Charles and I have had ongoing issues at Bowie dealing with racism, discrimination, and all of our years as being supportive parents and a family for AISD. I have to say this is the first time that we have encountered such actions, and it's been a long haul. It's been since her freshman year, and now she has graduated 2020, and so we did not receive effective communication and outreach and advice and assistance. We're very proactive on trying to get resolved with these matters once they reared their ugly head. We talked to everyone possible, from the school campus to the district.
By the way,
office,
somebody's typing.
and just met a lot of resistance. And so we ended up, unfortunately, having to go to litigation.
Okay. So Ms. Parks, we're going to talk a lot more about, the case and the situation. Where's Kameron tonight, though? Tell us.
Yes, Kameron got a notification this morning from LSU, Louisiana State University, where she has been accepted for the fall semester. And they sent her an email. They're just trying to get everything worked out for the fall. And so they gave her a time slot for 7 p.m. To do a virtual meeting with her advisors and the agricultural department. Kameron will be attending LSU to become a large animal veterinarian with a specialty in equestrian rehabilitation horses. And so as soon as she is done, she is going to log on and join us.
Okay, good. Now, when she comes on, ask her to get on the Zoom, though, if that's okay.
Yes, I did.
All right, thank you. So once again, my goal for tonight, besides the obvious and having a dialogue, is for our group to get together, and with Nelson when he gets on, and even if he doesn't tonight for some reason, to be able to produce a list of items that we want AISD to work on, okay? So for all the people out there that are listening, I want you to keep a little cheat sheet of things that you would like AISD to address. And as a second part, in terms of Kameron's case, just so happens tomorrow night I'm deposing Dr. Cruz, who's their Title VI coordinator. And so I want you to also keep a little cheat sheet of what kind of questions you'd like me to ask him. And we're going to talk a lot more in depth about both those items when we get past the first part of our presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about Title VI. And I want to start off talking about it in the context of other civil rights laws that protect individuals at school. And I'm not going to talk about the Constitution. I'm going to talk about specific laws. So there's three that come up in schools most importantly. There's Title IX, which deals with sex, gender stereotypes. And it's intended to protect people, not just in athletics, as most of us think about it, but also to protect people from bullying and harassment or assault or even sexual assault based upon sex, gender, or gender stereotypes, and that's Title IX. Title VI, Section 504, and the ADA, of course, is to protect people from bullying and harassment or assaults based upon disability. And then Title VI, of course, is intended to protect people from bullying, harassment, assaults based upon race, nationality, or country of origin. Okay? Now, this is not a test, but just to kind of give everybody an idea of the world that I live in and that we live in a legal universe. So we have filed in federal courts over 40 cases dealing with bullying and harassment that involve these laws. And we probably have another 20 that we have filed with TEA. So that's about 60 cases. Now, under the law itself, under the rules, which are regulations developed by the Department of Justice or the Department of Education, as the case may be, under jurisprudence and professional directives by the Office of Civil Rights from the Department of Education, and school board policies and procedures, every single one of them says that if somebody finds out someone's being bullied and harassed because of sex, you need to report it to the Title IX coordinator. Or if someone's being bullied and harassed because of disability, it needs to go to the 504 coordinator. Or if someone's being bullied and harassed because of race, it needs to go to the Title VI coordinator. So out of those 60 cases we have filed over the years, guess how many cases have actually gone to the right coordinator? None. Not one across the entire state of Texas. So
well, isn't that part of the runaround?
Well, yes. Thank you for the softball question, but yes, that's the problem. And AISD, and let me say something about AISD because we do this all over the state. AISD is one of the best school districts. It's one of the better ones. And the stuff that goes on there is outrageous. So you can imagine what's happening in other parts of the state. Mr. Linder. There you go. We see you. If you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself real quick, I'd appreciate that. You need to unmute yourself first, though.
Okay.
There you go. Yes, sir. If you can introduce yourself to everybody, we've already done that once for ourselves, but you weren't with us. So if you can do that now, I'd humbly appreciate it.
I'll make it very quick. I'm Nelson Linder, president of the Austin NAACP for 20 years. Our mission is pretty simple. We address racism in every major category: education, economics, housing, you name it. That's what we do. Our job is to try to eradicate racism or reduce it wherever we work. And I can tell you, in Austin, Texas, the past 20 years, we've been very busy, especially in education. Quickly, I was born in Macon, Georgia, in 1958, came here in 1984. I'm a Houston-Tilson graduate in business and economics. And I think I'll stop there.
Okay. We'll have, like we talked about a little bit earlier today, you're going to be our cleanup hitter to kind of pull all this together for us. So I was telling a story about the problems in Texas and the problems with AISD is that they have people set up to be coordinators for these kinds of complaints. The Title VI coordinator to deal with bullying and harassment and assaults based upon race, nationality, religion, country of origin it happens to be Dr. Cruz, who's also the superintendent. So that's a little bit of a segue into the lawsuit we currently have on behalf of Kameron Sneed. Is Kameron back yet, Ms. Parks?
No, she's still on with her conference.
Okay. And let me ask you a question. Your sound is a little bit muffled. Are you doing this on the computer or a phone?
Yes, I'm on my Chrome notebook.
Fernando, is there a way that she can call in? I think would be a clearer, if I'm right. Isn't there a phone number you can call in for people that are just participating by phone?
Yeah, there's a phone number. I can resend that email.
Yeah, let's see if we can get that from Ms. Parks. But while we're waiting, let me ask some questions.
Okay.
So, and we sent this out before. Tell us a little bit about your daughter.
Yes, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, that
Can
sounds a
you
little bit
hear
better.
me?
Why don't you keep going? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, Kameron is an avid agricultural kiddo. She comes from a long family of farmers and ranchers and military person, and we have always been blessed with her love of animals and agriculture. And so she has always been a part of the FFA, which is Future Farmers of America.
By the way, Ms. Parks, I'm going to interrupt. Ms. Parks,
there at Bowie High School.
Ms. Parks, I'm
She
going to interrupt for a
also
second. Can you hear me?
very active in their outdoor performing ensemble. She was a percussionist. She also came into Bowie very active in sport. Yes. I can hear you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm wondering if you can switch to the phone. If Fernando, have you sent her that email? We're all wrestling with this new technology.
Yeah, I'm gonna need a minute.
Okay. It's worth waiting for. Well, let me talk a little bit about the case. And Ms. Parks, while we're waiting to transfer over, can you hear me right now? Well, let me talk a little bit about the case. Kameron was the only African-American student in the FFA at the Bowie High School.
Yes.
And when she was there, I think it was in 10th grade, am I right? She was at the farm and somebody hung up a feed bag to look like a noose. Is that right? Yeah, we're having problems with this.
Yes.
Okay. So, and of course, you filed a complaint with the school officials at that time, didn't you? Okay. And I'll lead you through this to kind of help us move through this a little bit more quickly. And of course, they didn't do anything, did they?
Correct.
Okay. And then also along the way, at some point, a bunch of kids were making fun of Kameron's hair, and they were touching her hair and they were making fun of her hair, correct?
Correct.
And you complained about that too, didn't you?
Correct.
And they didn't do anything about that either, did they?
Correct.
And then over the course of time, particularly Miss Parks and Kameron, as they were walking on the farm, you were threatened by a bunch of Caucasian students, weren't you?
Yes.
And you complained about that too, didn't you?
Yes, we did so.
Right. And then there was at a time where Kameron got this kind of made up award for being a member of the FFA. They called it the Sasquatch Award. Remember that?
Yes, actually, that was the band program.
And of
That
course,
was actually the.
and of course, you complained about that as well, didn't you?
Yes.
Okay. And then, and I'm just going over a bunch of these. You complained for over the course of 3 years, didn't you?
Yes.
And you complained to the school vice principal, correct?
Yes.
And the school
The
counselor
teachers. Yes.
and the principals
Yes.
and the, I think it's the associate superintendent for high schools, Dr.
That's
Shapiro.
correct.
And even all the way to
Yeah.
Dr. Cruz, right?
That's correct.
And
Yes.
just over 3 years, you probably made dozens, if not, I don't know, 50 or 60 various complaints. Am I right?
Yes. Many.
So let me make two comments.
Many emails.
Right, and emails, of course. So I'll make two comments as we kind of move on a little bit. Is one, that it was never, ever, ever referred to the Title IX, to the Title VI coordinator. So mom and dad and Kameron, oh, I forgot to say the most horrible thing of all. So as part of the FFA, one of her programs, somebody cut up her animals, right? She had animals for show for FFA, and students cut it up. The barns were all over the barns, and the bathrooms in the barn with the N-word. They were carved into everything. They made complaints about that. The school district didn't do a thing about that. They never referred it, with all these dozens upon dozens and dozens of complaints, to the Title VI coordinator. Never. When I deposed, now this is the part that gave me heartache, among all the things that gave me heartache in this case. When I deposed the principal of the school and asked him about all these incidents, we went through all of them in excruciating detail. His answer was, believe it or not, that he did investigate all the complaints and not one of them rose to the level of race-based animus. Not one of them did he believe had anything to do with bullying, harassment based upon race or racial discrimination. And when I heard that, I just about went through the roof, because that let me know what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a system that is doing all it can to put its head in the sand and not deal with racial discrimination issues that, to me, are overt. I mean, when you have a parent sending emails and talking to people and using the word racial discrimination, and we have pictures of nooses, and we have pictures of the farm with bad words all over it, and we have pictures of animals being destroyed because of these children who are using white epithets at the same time they do it, and the school district does nothing. That's a problem. That's a problem. You know, actually, Nelson, I'm going to kind of defer to you for a second. I'd like you to talk a little bit about your experience dealing with AISD on these and other types of issues.
Well, so I can tell you this. A lot of folks I see having this problem today, I've met with them in the past, so it's a very common occurrence. But I want to cite a study context of my remarks, because in 2011, I was study at Texas A&M. And here's what it said. It tracks students between the grades of 7 and 8 from 2000 to 2002. Only 3% of those exposed to took place were based on state law. 97% was discretionary, and 31% were African American students. But think about those numbers. 97% based on somebody's opinion. I mean, that's incredible. So when we engage these school districts about these kind of complaints, whether it be racism or bullying, it's almost impossible to get them to respond. And what happens is, over a long period of time, people feel victimized, become very frustrated, and eventually try to defend themselves. But our problem has been, it's very difficult to get AISD to respond and engage, have meaningful discussions about how to reduce these kinds of incidences. That's one thing to another. And of course, for students, based on my experience, it makes it excruciating bullying and isolation, and the parents face. That's what we're seeing, and it's what I've seen for the past 15 years. Now, I've worked with other districts. I've worked with Cal, Bastrop, Round-Rock, Georgetown, and this system here is probably the worst in terms of responding to complaints and having a conversation to address them. That's been my basic experience with the Austin Independent School District. And one other point that's going to connect later, when you put kids into the system and you suspend them, expose them, the other thing is there's a direct connection between expulsion and the criminal justice system. In that same study, it says that that in Texas, the students who went to the system for expulsion, 23% of the time were more likely to be introduced to the criminal justice system, whereas those that didn't get exposed and suspended, only 2%. So clearly, there's a correlation between discretionary expulsion, suspension, and our kids, Black mostly, being introduced to the criminal justice system. That's why this is such a critical problem in the AISD.
And a critical time for us to move on this. Would you agree?
Hey, Marty, I'd like to point out that, and Nelson didn't make it very clear, but God, hi, Nelson. There are two tracks when, and of course, I know that Kameron can speak to this and probably will. There are two tracks all of a sudden as a juvenile when you find yourself accused of a crime. They have the criminal side, the criminal track, which guys like me and Kameron handle on a regular basis. Then you've got the school disciplinary track, which Nelson's talking to, and Marty has alluded to. Marty, once you engage a guy like Marty, you've probably gone through all of the steps and procedures that you can handle there that Nelson just described, contacting the school, trying to initiate a dialogue and all of those things. And by the time it fails, you'll find yourself hiring a guy like Marty to bring a lawsuit to try to break the log jam. What I'm talking about is when we have a child who's been accused of a crime in school, he also has then the school disciplinary track that he has to negotiate as well. And the school disciplinary track is much more onerous in many ways than the criminal track, because the standard of proof for the school disciplinary track is dismally low. The criminal track, of course, is guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. What happens is ostracization, and I cannot say that word, never have been able to say that word, but a kid who finds himself on the disciplinary track finds himself either removed from the school setting and put into some sort of a discipline program, which is right there a scarlet letter in and of itself. And then we still have to negotiate the criminal track. And I'll talk to that a little bit further. I just wanted to make sure that people have a sense of the duality, the two-track system, and how that really hampers a young person who's finding themselves under attack by the government and by the school district, who sometimes, more often than not, is trying to save their own resources and protect themselves from some feigned, imagined liability down the road.
You know what, Skip? That's a great segue, and I never really thought about talking about it at depth, let alone at all. But, David and Fernando in our firm do a whole bunch of disciplinary work with school districts through the grievance procedure. So since Skip brought that up, would one of you all talk a little bit about what that general procedure looks like and I'm going to talk about non-special ed kids, just for regular kids now. What does that particularly mean for school districts?
Well, Marty, to segue into answering that, I think one of the things to think about is, that because some of the chat that's going on, they are asking about special education and whether the students here have disabilities. And I think one of the, really special overlaps is that all of this comes from civil rights issues. It's the access, whether it's the special education students or whether it's the whether it's just students of color or, minority students, underrepresented populations. And so I think it's worth noting that's kind of, I think, in particular why our firm represents both. You work on both civil rights cases and disability cases because that's an overlap. And so that's kind of just a specific minutia, I think.
Okay. Well, once again, can David or Fernando, if you can just tell for the audience anyway, and for ourselves, just briefly, what's the process like for someone who may be being disciplined at the AISD?
Okay.
What's going to happen?
Well, 60 seconds or less, since we're on a time frame here. In a general disciplinary issue, there's a student code of conduct, and if they're just a regular ed student, there's no disability involved, they'll be processed to the student code of conduct. Divides up in two bunches. One is a discretionary violation, one is mandatory. And depending on the flow chart there, discretionary means a administrator, usually assistant principal or vice principal, may do X, Y, or Z. There's 4 things they have to consider in any disciplinary piece, which is self-defense, disciplinary record, does the student have a disability, as well as did the student know it was right, wrong, or is the student homeless. That has to be considered in. AISD, as a rule, does not do that or even document that. And then there's an appeal process from that. If you're a special ed student, you get what's called an MDR. It's a manifestation determination hearing, where they have to ask 2 questions during an IEP meeting, or what we call ARD in Texas, which means 1, was the behavior related to the disability, yes or no? And question 2, did the student's IEP, BIP, was it in place and was it followed during that particular meeting? That's the short version. Unfortunately, almost 99% of the time, the ARD committee is kind of has a script, and in Austin ISD, it's almost generally found, not always, but generally found, the student never has, it's not related to the student's disability. That's the short version. I want to come back to the main thought of what we have today.
David, let me ask you a question though, for regular ed students of any color, any persuasion for a minute. So the process is that parents get a letter and say, we're going to have this hearing to determine whether or not your child goes into ISS. They're in school suspension, or they go to a DAP, which is a disciplinary alternative education placement, or maybe even they're expelled, right? So tell us all just once again, a minute or 2 about that process, how that works for people.
Well,
there's
supposed to be notification to the parent. Unfortunately, that rarely takes place. There's supposed to be a letter. There's supposed to be documentation. And so a lot of times the first fact finder is the principal or assistant principal, and there's a bifurcation. If it's 10 days or less, they can pretty much assign a student wherever they're going to be. If it's 10 days or more, there are substantive rights, and you get a hearing and you go through an appeals process. One of the issues we have in AISD is very rarely do they tell the parents of the rights they have, of the consideration, that they can ask for the documentation, that they have a right to challenge any of the information that occurs during that particular process. And there is maybe we watch too many episodes of Happy Days, there's an inherent piece that we trust schools. They're going to do the right thing. Unfortunately, this is not true, and we see a high disproportionality of students in color in this particular process.
And just one last brief question before we move on, but just tying this back together. So what that means is that a student, while the student's waiting to go through the adjudication process and either the juvenile courts, we'll move on to next, or the adult courts, they could be suspended from school and be getting nothing. Am I right?
Well, typically there's a 3-day in-school suspension. If it's a serious incident, sometimes there's no rationale, no research. We've done some open records requests in other districts. There's sometimes a 3-day out-of-school suspension, or sometimes an in-school suspension, which makes absolutely no sense if it's an out-of-school suspension. Then when you look at it just through the framework of research, it's very rarely supported for how the decision makers, which is your assistant principal or principal, are making decisions and deciding what to do with the student. And if you think about 3 days suspension, depending on the part of the semester, they're missing direct instruction. They're out. They're missing everything, regardless of whether they committed the offense or not. But let's back to you, Marty.
Right. That's a good segue. Kameron, can you talk a little bit about your experience generally dealing with the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline, as we unfortunately call it, and then more specifically about dealing with AISD personnel and the people that come to that you defend?
Well, I'll try to summarize it like this. First, when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, it's a term that I don't like, but it's a term that exists and it's perpetuated all over the country. And what we're talking about is that we have schools that funnel out children into the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. Now, I look at these systems when you're talking about school and our criminal justice system as essentially as a 4-lane highway. 4-lane highway is one where you've got the school system, which is considered to be an administrative process. You've got the JP and municipal courts, which are criminal courts. And then you've got the juvenile justice courts. And then you've got the county and adult courts. So those are the 4 lanes. Now, the problem is, the big challenge is that they are 4 lanes, but they overlap, they move in and out, and they all lead to what I call is a adultification or criminalization of the educational process. What I mean by that is that we know where we are with our adults in our criminal justice system. We know we have a system that's broken. We know that we have a system that does not treat all of its citizens equally. And then we have a school system which funnels, kids through that system, such as, getting into criminal courts, the JP municipal courts. We have a lot, Skip was talking about earlier, discretionary behavior, where at one point we had our school systems that essentially created their own penal code, of offenses, but they were moving children out of the school system and into these criminal courts. Now, it's important is because in the school system, and that process is, children are not mandated or required to have an attorney. In our JP and our municipal courts, they're not guaranteed the right to counsel, either. In our adult courts, they are not guaranteed, are required to have an attorney. They can waive that right, but in the juvenile courts, for the most part, they're required to have an attorney. And so we don't all have those disputes settled in the courts. And the problem that we have is that even in the districts such as AISD, is where you get justice and what type of justice you get is going to basically depend upon the color of your skin and 2, your zip code on the way you live, is because there is not an equitable system that goes throughout the school system. I used to be able to, look, not to say look and tell, but we would have situations where certain schools would have high numbers of referrals. And then I would change approximately every 2 years. And I started to wonder, how is that happening? And then I started looking at it is that it seems as like, when we had a change of principals, a change of assistant principals, that, that could determine or dictate exactly what would happen, in those kind of situations, because that's why you can have one school, you're going to have a situation that can be handled administratively, be dealt with, maybe an in-school suspension, maybe a counseling, and another one could be the implementation of charges. And most of the charges that we get in juvenile court, the same thing in adult court, are going to be for minor misdemeanor offenses. So we're not talking about the serious, Title V mandatory offenses that are ending up in juvenile court. But the other thing that I would say is, as I said, my office, we handle well over 90% of all the juvenile cases in Travis County. Now, that includes other school districts, but Austin ISD is the biggest school district that we are dealt with. And an interesting thing, and we handle probably about 2,000 cases a year. When school is in, our caseload is up. When school is out, our caseload goes down. And so there's this inverse relationship between what is happening in school, because most of my referrals or cases are coming from school, because we have a, AISD is just like many other school districts, which has what I call a policing of the school system, whereas, as I look over the panel, I think about all of us, some of us are older than, some of us younger than us, but, I looked at it is that, when we talked about school discipline, we didn't have cops, police officers in school. We didn't have metal detectors. We didn't have that type of process, but yet we were able to deal with the whole educational environment. And in every school district, in every school that I know of, is that they are in somewhere where they can pick up the phone and they can call the police. They don't have to being able to go down the hall and being able to get someone. But that's where we are, and getting back to my analogy of the 4-lane highway, if it was sort of like if we would take our police force and we would line up our police force along the highway, and we could be able to give, tickets all day long and stop people for behavior. I heard Warren Buffett say something one time and said, if you follow somebody for 500 miles, you're going to be able to find a criminal offense. And since that's what we've done in some of our schools. Now, all of our schools are not all like that, but the problem that we have is that because we don't have an equalization of the justice, we are having a justice system that is failing, because what we've done is that we've got a severe overrepresentation of youth of color, at every phase of our juvenile justice system and every phase of our criminalization. So, getting back to that, your color of your skin as well as where you live is more likely going to determine whether or not you'll be suspended, whether or not you'll be referred to ISS, whether or not you'll give a warning, whether or not you'll be arrested, whether or not you'll be detained, whether or not you'll be convicted, placed on probation, removed out of your home, tried as an adult. And so, until we address and deal with those issues, then we're going to continue to have this scattered approach to justice.
Let me ask you a question, and this is for everybody who's listening, but I'm going to direct it to you, but anyone else who wants to. And by the way, I want to break this up into 3 parts before I forget. There's the civil part, this criminal justice part, and deals with juvenile court and adult court, and then what I call everything else. I'm going to let, you call yourself Dr. Dickerson because you're a professor at UT?
I don't. I call myself professor, but I don't get hung up on titles.
All right, but when we get there, because you're going to be the everything else kind of institutionalized racism issue we're going to talk about. But since we're talking about the criminal justice part, my question for all of us, and first I'm going to direct it to you, Kameron. So if you were, king for a day, and you could make some changes at the system, at the AISD point where it starts, because there's lots of issues along the way, right? What are some of the things you would suggest that we can put on our list? Because that's one of the things Nelson and I talked about, is putting together a list after this and program, and maybe, shortly thereafter, and presenting some things to the school board. So what are the things you would look at on your list of things to the school canon should do, the school district canon should do?
The first thing I was look at is this over-monetization of the criminalization of our youth. What I mean by that is that in many places, we spend more money on police in schools than we do on counselors. And so that's the first thing that I would be able to do, is to be able to change that and being able so that we can address that kind of situations. Because, our youth are just facing so many societal issues, and if we can address that by people who are trained and people who are sensitive to the needs of these youth, then we would be able to basically, address a lot of the imbalances that we would have. So that was the first thing that I would do if I was king for the day. And I'm going to go beyond your question. If I was the second thing, I would say look at it as like, all right, let's look at, you know, our educational type of system, and we've got to be able to promise our youth better. You know, when we talk about those zip codes and those different schools, why is it that we've, you know, accepted, you know, lower graduation rates? We have, you know, students who are lesser ready for college. We have, you know, so many things that we need to be able to address. And then when we look at, for example, AISD runs the school systems in our juvenile facilities. And you would think that we would be able to give them more specialized schooling and teaching, but they seem to be getting the short end of the stick, you know, and it's not just in the juvenile detention facilities, it's in alternative schools. And so those are the two things that I would be able to focus on. You know, let's really, really guarantee, you know, quality education to everyone.
Skip, what are the things that you would, I have my list I'm going to throw in here soon, but Skip and Nelson and Michele as well. What other things do you think we should add to a list of things AISD should do to deal with the criminal justice issue, since that's our topic for the moment? And we've got some more time, so we're going to talk about it all.
I'll go first real quick. I have coined the term reimagine justice and reimagine policing. And in this kind of construct, I think we've got a situation where both of those concepts would probably apply here, given children transitioning from the juvenile system into the adult system. We've criminalized so many activities now of children that children really don't have an opportunity, if they're of color, to learn from some mistakes, even though that's what the goal of the disciplinary system is said to be at the secondary school level. They say, oh, this is all a learning experience, kind of like Title IX. It's all a big learning experience and everybody's going to benefit and be more intelligent from this. But unfortunately, what really results is that the kid gets stigmatized. Again, we're talking about that scarlet letter, and you put a scarlet letter on a high school kid, that carries a lot more weight in terms of bullying or being the target of a bully, or in reducing their self-value, in comparing themselves to other children within the same social construct, the same social space. So if you were to ask me, I would tell you I would reimagine education, reimagine justice, and the first step that I would take would be to re-examine just exactly what the role of the resource officer is at the school. It started off that he was supposed to be their kind of, and we started with all these crazy independent school district police forces now that have their own chief, have their own forces, and occupy their own buildings, have their own vehicles, and therefore have their own promotion criteria, one of which is always with the police officers. In order to get promoted, you have to show production, crime-solving capabilities. And you can't do that unless you arrest somebody, unless you do something that gets recognition for your hard work and efforts. So like Kameron pointed out, and I'm sure that Professor Dickerson is going to point out, the prioritization, the second thing, the prioritization of the money has to be re-examined as well. Not just the role of AISD, police, the RSO, but also the funding and how we spend education dollars. We have, like Kameron says, it costs more. We spend more money now in the disciplining of children and putting them into the criminal system, for which the school district has no financial obligation to fund. That's all independent of the school district's general fund that's allotted to them on an annual basis. So I would say we have to reimagine exactly what is it RSOs are supposed to do. Right now, we think that the RSO is really there to keep kids who are bad kids down, and also they think that they're supposed to be doing some sort of service where they're protecting the schools from external threat. terrorism and that kind of thing, which is certainly necessary. But when those certain external threats aren't around, the idle hands and idle mind concept comes into play, and suddenly we find ourselves, police officers, needing something to do. And unfortunately, even though with their great amount of training and experience, they sometimes themselves revert back to infantile and adolescent behavior and find somebody who they can pick on and bully. And that's where the animosity between students and law enforcement really comes to bear, really comes together and boils and bubbles up, causing the first step towards the school to prison pipeline, which is what I call contempt of cop charges. With that, I'll pass it to Professor Dickerson.
I'll make two quick comments, and they relate to what we've already talked about. And the first one is relating to where is the money that is being used and allocated to the school system with respect to the SROs. First, do we really need to have them there? Second, could we better allocate those funds to be used for more guidance counselors, to be used for more mental health counseling, to deal with some of the other things that may be going on in children's lives that may cause them not to be particularly happy at school. But when you're happy and you're a Black boy, you're angry and there's something wrong with you, and the SROs or the APs need to get involved. Second relates to actually an article that was in, I think, the New York Times today. They looked at the percentage of time that police officers spend doing different things. And they found that a very low percentage of that time is actually spent on violent crimes. So if they're not spending that much time, and I suspect SROs are the same thing, if you're not spending that much time on school shootings and terrorism, one wonders why you need to have a police officer embedded in a school as opposed to having someone else that could perhaps be there to help children rather than to criminalize children. And the second is actually relates to what could we do? I spent the semester teaching on Zoom. I didn't love it, but you can make it work. And it seems to me that since all of the ISDs, or most of the ISDs across the state of Texas, have had to do this Zoom experiment as well, why not make that mandatory for children who are in ISS, out of school suspension, juvenile detention? Why not say, y'all had to figure out how to do Zoom in this COVID semester, find a way to make sure that this is a permanent change so that children aren't missing class time when they are in some sort of a detention type facility.
That's excellent. By the way, Kameron, you just joined us. If you could show yourself, we're going to have some questions for you in a little bit. One of the things that I've thought about recently, a couple of things in this particular area is I think as we talk to Dr. Cruz and anybody else over at the school that deals with this issue, and we are going to be speaking with them, is I think there has to be somebody who kind of makes sure school districts don't refer someone to the police for charges or the county attorney or the DA for charges without vetting it. I think there has to be a system set up to just stop it, to just stop that faucet first and look at alternative issues before it bounces into the criminal justice world. Because once it bounces into the criminal justice world, it takes on a life of its own, as everybody's just spoken about. So that's one thing that I want to put to the list. The other thing, I have a few others, I'm going to let you comment on them as they wish, if they wish, is I think we need to change the law for students in Texas from 17 to 18 for court, for criminal court, going from juvenile court to adult court. But I also think AISD should talk to them about this, Nelson, is to have a special carve out of courts for students who are above, even if it's 17, but still in school. Because kids could be all the way up, for special ed students in particular, up to 21 or almost 22, still be so we need to arrange, and maybe Skip, I'll let you talk about that, because that's who you represent a lot of times.
Hey, Martin, I need to say something here, John.
Please.
I want to go back to my original premise, because I'm talking about what we're dealing with here.
Yes, sir.
If 97% of the people
parents of an African-American
suspension, expulsions, and 3% of state law, what I see primarily is discretionary suspension. In those cases, we have the opportunity to get with the school system and the parents and talk about what happened. I think that's an enormous opportunity at 97%. That way people are not being criminalized, and it works sometimes. For example, over 7 years ago, we talked about having a concept of restorative justice inside the school system. We had conversations about these issues. One of the problems is, if a kid is being bullied or being antagonized, oftentimes there's absolutely no intervention. What happens? Well, they try to defend themselves. So if there's no intervention from the school, what are they going to do? They're going to have to defend themselves. So I want to focus on, again, where the problem is really coming from in my job, because if I have a state law violation, which might have a weapon or something, I'm going to call an attorney. But that's not what we're getting. We're getting cases where they're fairly simple issues, and somebody made the decision to escalate the problem. And as a result, these kids keep going to the wrong place. And pretty soon it does become violation. So I want to focus on, once again, the discretionary stuff that we're looking at that never gets addressed. And I can tell you this, at AISD, when we talked to SROs about these problems, they were very attentive and actually made a lot of changes that went to reduction of those kinds of charges. So I've seen, if you can have more restorative justice kind of conversations based on discretionary suspension, you can stop a lot of the stuff right where it begins. And so I've seen that way the parents who don't have a lot of money, they'll have to buy attorneys and everything else, then get attorneys. But if we can
Can
stop
I
this,
ask you, Nelson,
sure.
can I ask you two things so you can explain to our audience? One, just specifically what restorative justice means in general, and two, specifically about your conversations with AISD years ago about restorative justice and what happened.
Well, really, I'm going to explain it this way, because there was a time in our communities we had natural restorative justice conversations. We don't have it anymore in our school system. We lost that as a cultural thing. So now what happens is you form a panel where the folks who are involved come to a table. It might be a minister, it might be a parent, it might be somebody in that child's life, and they get with the school system and they talk about what occurred. And they talk about practical things to do to solve these kind of issues. And they take the criminal stuff, if necessary, we're not there yet, off the table. So how can we talk this problem out and help this child from going to another location? That's what it really means. We don't have that anymore. We're trying to restore it now, where if a child has a problem, call the parent, call the family, let's talk about what just happened. And oftentimes around the country, what I've seen, it makes a tremendous difference. What you're doing is you're talking to that child and you're not really criminalizing them or escalating the problem. And I've seen with police officers, in particular, in the school systems, for them to see a conversation about how to communicate and intervene makes a tremendous difference. And that's kind of where I'm coming from. I just think that with all these cases being discretionary, if we can improve our intervention, have more of a dialogue among all parties involved, including the child, and make sure if the child is being abused or bullied, we have to intervene. What I see is oftentimes, especially in AISD, they never intervene. And as a result, that child is put into a corner, then all of a sudden we're dealing with state law.
One of the other civil suits that we're working on, Mom is not here with us, but it has to do a little bit with what you said. She was bullied and harassed all the time. She's a mixed heritage. She's from Africa and Brazil. Kids made fun of her all the time. They told her to go back where she came from, told her to go back from where she came from. They pick on her, they touch her, they peck at her, they mess with her hair. And then finally she got so frustrated she fought back. So guess who got in trouble?
Yeah.
Right. All right, but we're going to take a step backward, but there's Kameron. Kameron, how are you, dear?
I'm good.
So you've decided to go to LSU?
Yes.
Good. You looking forward to it?
Yes.
We're going to take a step backward because I think it's very important that people meet you, and there's a lot of people out there watching us right now. For you to tell a little bit of your story, what it's been like at AISD for the last few years. And Miss Dickerson's had a son who also was there at the same time, and I think you all are friends. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what I call the institutionalized racism at AISD or Bowie High School in particular.
Where would you like me to start?
Wherever you'd like.
Well, my impression because I had a cousin that went to Bowie years prior than me. So my impression of Bowie was very high. I thought very highly of Bowie. Me and my family did, especially since they had an FFA program. But once I did get to Bowie, I did volleyball, marching band, in track. So I was very involved in a lot of organizations and groups. I also was a part of MCAC, which is the Multicultural Awareness Club. So when I got to Bowie, I was pretty much, well-rounded. A lot of people knew me. There was a lot of racial discrimination within almost every organization I was in. I would say that the only two organizations I didn't experience anything in would be MCAC, which is the Multicultural Awareness Club, and track. Other than that, FFA, I had racial discrimination issues. In band, I had them. In volleyball, I had them. And me being, this well-rounded student, I never understood why I was the one who was always having to get the backlash of the discrimination and the bullying and the harassment, because I was always an outgoing student who helped people when they needed to be helped, who was always there, who helped teachers, who stood up when, kids needed help. So I never understood why I always got the backlash. It started freshman year. So me and my, my family, my parents, we just took the steps that we needed to take to, get through certain situations. But of course, we all kind of assumed that, I guess, they would resolve and then it would stop at some point. Well, at least that was the hope, but it never did. All 4 years of high school, it has gotten worse. My senior year of high school was probably the less, I would say less difficult. And that's mainly because I had to isolate myself kind of away from like everybody and everything. But I would definitely say that freshman year is when it started, and it's like it was a domino effect, and it just got worse no matter, how much I put myself out there, or it was almost like the more I helped people or the more I did good things, the more I would get racial discriminated and harassed and kind of things like that. And my junior year, I would definitely say was the worst, simply because that's when the harassment and the bullying really, got bad. But that's also when like family got pulled into it. And it was kind of like, it wasn't just, okay, you're bullying me, or you're harassing me, or you're discriminating me because of the color of my skin or my ethnicity or whatever the case may be. It was more like, well, it's you and your whole family. And of course, being at Bowie, it's majority, white Americans, and there's not really a lot of African American students that go to Bowie, and that's just kind of how it is. Most African American kids that are there are on transfers. So of course, me being, this country girl that's in almost everything, I was always almost the only Black kid in almost every organization. FFA especially, freshman year, there were a couple, biracial kids that were in FFA. But once they saw how, racial problems started to arise and stuff like that, they dropped out immediately. I was the only full African-American kid that stuck through it all. So I guess you could say that that's kind of just the gist of what happened throughout my high school experience. But it was definitely a lot of racial discrimination throughout it.
Yeah, Kameron, I talked before you and your mom got on. I talked a little bit about some of the stuff you experienced specifically, so I don't need to go over that again. But they have this line as an attorney. They say, "Don't ask a question you don't know the answer to." But I'm going to ask you a question, okay? I want to make sure I ask it right. What was worse, the bullying and harassment you experienced from the students, or the failure or the feeling you got from the school district not to do anything about it?
I would say personally. What was that?
What made you feel worse?
What made me feel worse was faculty and administration not doing or not taking the steps that they're supposed to do as administrators to, I guess you could say, protect me, because I go to school and I should be able to feel like teachers and administrators protect me and have my back. And every day I went, I never felt that. So it wasn't so much that, oh, these kids are calling me out of my name or they're doing things. It was the fact that no matter how much, whether it was me or my parents or whoever it was, went to administration, they never did what they were supposed to.
Right. And their deafness hurt more than what you heard sometimes from those other students. Am I right?
Yes.
And just the last piece of this, which is equally horrific, is that because you and your mom and your dad complained, people started retaliating against you, didn't they?
Yes.
Right. And so here we are, you know, this beautiful young lady who is, you know, great student in just about everything she touches. So she's being victimized for who she is. Horrible. She complains to school district. They turn a blind eye. Horrible. Makes it worse. And then because she complained, she becomes a victim of retaliation. So now she's victimized 3 times. And that's what I just find horrific. You know, I'm fortunate that, you know, her family came to me and we're putting this in civil litigation and, you know, we're dealing with AISD on this. But God knows how many other dozens, if not hundreds of students are in the same situation. Am I right?
Yes.
By the way, I've got to do this. I don't know if you all are aware of this. Did you see what happened today at O. Henry Middle School? Are you guys familiar with this? Let me kind of put this up here. So a bunch of students that were going into the O. Henry Middle School put together a video that was racist and anti-Semitic, and they posted it. I think they're going, or they're from middle school, they're going to Anderson High. And it got taken down pretty quickly, but it got on to moveon.org and or change.org, I'm sorry. And if you can go on to change.org, this happened today, everybody. This happened today as we speak. It's horrible. It's just horrible. So anyway, it's just kind of another segue to our discussions for the moment. A few things I'd like to finish up on finish up.
I'm back from home.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Say again? I missed something, I'm sorry.
Well, hang
yeah.
on, Marty. Before you carry on, there are some really there are some really interesting comments that are following this discussion that I'd hate to omit because they're thoughtful. There's a person named Lisa Flores who suggests that that installing some sort of ombudsman system might be a feature that can help the parents navigate the system and maybe keep the system honest, because there's a certain familiarity when you're dealing with the same people all the time. When different lawyers come in on each complaint and each lawyer is different, of course, then the school has the advantage because they know the rules and they know how they play within their playground. An ombudsman who regularly operates in that environment might have an advantage over a lawyer who comes in and tries to get some work done. So I tell you, Lisa's Ms. Flores's comment is very, very intelligent. There's a Christina Villarreal who's also making some comments that are intelligent, having to do with how how 504 is really treated by the school district as a drain on resources, as opposed to an obligation to teach children with learning disabilities. And so it's easy, and so they desire, she suggests that the natural inclination, therefore, is to remove a special ed student from the school environment so they can save that money on those extra teachers, on those extra resources that need to be expended in order to adequately train a child with learning disabilities or learning special needs. So I think some of our comments are really, really, really interesting. And there's about 150 of them. I'm reading through them slowly.
Oh, Lord.
So the comments.
David, you all have a chance to do that. Let me tell a quick story about another case I have, because it's absolutely apropos. So we represented this young man who had an African-American boy, smart as could be, cute as anything. And he had some behavioral issues. He had ADHD that was very severe. And he was at a school in East Texas, and he was restrained every day, a couple of times a day. And it got bad, right? When he was just under 10 years old, he went back and he told his mom, he heard one of the staff people say, we can't wait till he's 10 years old because then we can file charges against him, right? And what that means in our universe as educators or lawyers that are dealing with this, or advocates, is they file charges when a student touches another teacher as a felony assault on a public servant, right?
That's exactly right.
That second. Let me just finish the story. So he was removed from so he did that. They filed charges. He was removed from the school, and he was put in the criminal justice detention center in East Texas for a couple of days. He was 10 years old. And then when they brought him to court, they shackled him. They had him wear an orange jumpsuit. They shackled his hands, and they shackled him to a dozen other kids that were going to juvenile court. And I find that horrific. And that's another case that we have that we have a civil case on. But I wanted to talk a little bit also about, you know, this issue that Christina brought up, and then Skip, I cut you off, so you wanted to talk about that some more as well. Oh, by the way, last part of the story, he moved to another school district. He never was restrained again. Did just fine. Did just fine.
So it's a really interesting social construct we've got here. We've got this, as I was listening to young Kameron there, and Kameron, I wish you the best of luck at LSU. I think you're going to find an interesting experience that awaits you. The interesting concepts that we're talking about here that bleed more deeply into the psyche of a student, which is a very tender thing at their age, involves institutional racism that we have yet to really confront, but only now are getting traction with. I mean, I would ask Kameron, what did it feel like to go to Bowie High School? The name Bowie, or the name Anderson, or the name Lee. How, Kameron, does that matter to you at all? I guess is the real question, that you're going to schools named after Confederates, and or if that doesn't matter, do we boomers need to back off of that and leave history alone? I'm curious to hear what Kameron has to say about that.
Good point.
To me, it kind of, I always knew that they were Confederate kind of supporters or were part of history. But for me, I guess I never really thought too much on the fact of that. It was more of what the school has to offer, and if the school was gonna give a better, you know, source of education than another school. I never really focused on who, you know, the names of the schools, simply because half the schools all over the world are named after people who supported, you know, racism and were part of Confederate things. So it's, you know, it didn't really affect me, but definitely after my high school experience and as I went through high school, it was definitely something that students in my school and in other high schools connected. They would start to, you know, say that, well, of course Bowie's like that. Look who it's named after, or, you know, kind of things like that. So definitely through my high school experience, I came across more and more people who were connecting the fact of that.
Marty, can I say something?
Please.
I'm on the phone now, so I hope you can hear me a little better.
Perfect.
Just on 2 points so that I don't forget. On the point that Mr. Davis was making about a comment that was made, first of all, regarding the ombudsman suggestion. I know that when I first started documenting and going through and seeing myself, witnessing what Kameron was going through, as well as myself, I remember when I wasn't getting anywhere with teachers or counselors or APs and so on and so forth, I remembered that when she was in middle school, and she attended Clint Small Middle School, and I recall one of our parent meetings we'd had because there was a death of a child, and I recall the contact that I had at that time. It was a person by the name of Miss Beverly Reed, and her title was an ombudsman at the time. And so I remembered that, and in my dire straits of trying to find someone who could just kind of direct me on where do I go next, what do I do. I reached out to her via email, and I remember that she informed me that that position was no longer a position in AISD. And I remember at that time, just to comment and to agree with the suggestion, I remember thinking at that time, who is going to advocate for those families? You know, who's going to be there as that, mediator or liaison to kind of help us if there's an issue? Because initially, I can't speak for everyone, but for myself, I was the parent that was telling other minority parents that were having difficulty prior to Kameron's issues that, well, it's communication, it's working together. We got to sit down, we got to, have each other's backs, we got to go directly to the source, we got to just come up with a plan of action, corrective action. And I was just being told that I was being naive, that's not how it is at this school. And I said to the principal and then to the superintendent that that's exactly right. That's exactly what I found out, that there was no one to assist us, was no one to advise us and help us. So we did look for that position, and we were told that it was no longer a position for AISD school district.
Ms. Parks, I want to direct you to a comment. You were in a meeting with lots of folks, and the school principal said something to you like this: "Can't you just be a bigger person?" You remember that?
Yes, I do. Mr. Mark Robinson said to me that he couldn't explain why the bag and the noose was hung. We had a meeting, the teachers and everyone was there, and I sent him a very lengthy email, and I asked him to just please let me know if I'm being unreasonable, but I just wanted to ask the teacher face to face, that had knowledge of the students that hung the noose. And I just wanted to know from her, number one, why he was allowed to do it and why it stayed there. I remember Kameron telling me when we first walked in and saw it swinging. And I remember her saying, we'll take it down. And I remember Charles being so hurt and angered, and they wanted to take it down. And I told them no, because what I wanted to see was how much they valued us and our daughter. I wanted to see that once I took pictures and reported that, I wanted to see what steps would be taken. And I have to tell you that replica, that noose, that bag stayed there for right at a week. And when we had a meeting with the principal and I said, I would like to know from the teachers of that FFA class, why was it allowed to be put there? And the teacher kind of began defending the students that had done it. And they said, well, they said they were just going to decorate for Halloween and, so on and so forth, different excuses. And so when I asked Mr. Robinson later, I said, I just want to know what's going to be done. And his response to me, and this is a quote, because there were witnesses to the phone call, and he said, Ms. Parks, I just want to ask you for this one, if you can just be the bigger person and let this go. And when I told him how offended I was, because number one, had I known he was going to say that, I would not have had him on speaker because Kameron heard it. So Kameron immediately was hurt that all the faith that we had in our educators and teachers had just come full throttle right in our faces to say, you're not worthy of staying here. He then followed it up with the comment that if you feel like you don't want Kameron to come back here because of the things that are happening to her, I will totally support a transfer to another institution. And on that note, I said, I think we're done talking. I don't think there's anything left to talk about.
And Marty, I want to rewind a little bit to add to that. By the way, everyone, Charles Sneed. But I'll just read a little in there. It says, the school principal did say he completed on-campus investigation and that he did not find any of the complaints made by Kameron or her parents were racial. Can somebody tell me the definition of racial if what they just said is not racial?
Charles,
they've got to
sir.
avoid liability. It's at the end of the day, everybody's here trying to avoid liability because the contest is between the parents and the school, and the only tool that the parents have to refer to is ultimately to shake their fist at the system and demand justice and threaten to sue under 504, Title IX, or Title VI, or Title VII, expecting that at least the courts and fellas like who are good-minded and like Marty can actually get the work done, unknowing that or not knowing that the decks is stacked against us from Jump Street anyway in the court. I would ask Professor Dickerson, what does she think about the ombuds, since there seems to be this dearth of opportunity for the parents to access resources and language to represent their positions in this situation. Nelson, of course, has been standing next to me shoulder to shoulder in many school situations, trying to break the logjam. How Professor Dickerson, what can we do as a group to move the idea of ombudsmen back into the system so that we can get a leveling of the playing field? Do we have to ask for it through the institution, which is going to be reluctant already? I mean, they buy brand new cruisers for their SROs, but they won't spend the resources on the ADA kids. Or should we look to Mr. Nelson and ask him to help us within the community itself, find sponsors to fund ombudsman district-wide?
The Ombuds program, we have it at UT, and it works really well. Now, I'm biased because I'm very good friends with the faculty ombuds at the university. So the challenge the problems I would suggest, if it is a person that is actually employed by or works at Bowie, they will be a failure because Bowie will ensure that they will be a failure. If it's a person that is employed by the school district, but they are not specifically linked to Bowie, I think there's a really good use of having an ombuds. And my view, again, consistent with my earlier comments, is perhaps take some of the money that you are spending on policing our children and allocate some of that money to paying for an ombuds. So I am reluctant to say that someone outside of an ISD should have to pay for a service that benefits the parents of an ISD, because we're already paying, the citizens of the city of Austin are already paying for, at least partially, for what happens in our schools. And I think that our schools have a duty and an obligation to have someone in place that actually helps parents navigate what should you do when something goes wrong, both if it potentially implicates the criminal justice system, but also if it implicates what do you do when your child is being bullied racially. I mean, I have more time.
I wanted to ask you a question, kind of to transition. You're also here as a mom.
Yeah, I'm here as a mom. And my
a little bit about your experience as a parent dealing with the kind of both specific things affected your children and what I would call the institutionalized racial issues at the school that we also need to address.
Okay, so I have two sons. One of them graduated from Bowie in 2018. The other one is a rising senior, no longer at Bowie, but at Aikens, and I'll explain why. And so my children were there for the entire time that overlapped when Kameron was there. And so when she was telling her story, and obviously I've heard it before, but when she was telling her story, what you will hear me say, it's as if we coordinated the script beforehand, because when Kameron's mom says that she was told that she was being naive, I could have told her, because I've endured both Bowie and the Bowie vertical schools. So small would have been different. My children, my older one went to Gariski. My younger one, I had to transfer out of Gariski and he went to small. So what happens at Bowie is they are breeding a certain environment at Gariski, and it follows those children into Bowie. So my 2018 graduate, I'm going to say a lot about sort of what they're doing now, just to sort of give you a sense of, had I allowed Goriski and Bowie to destroy my Black sons, which is clearly the goal, at least I felt the goal, what they wouldn't be doing right now. So my 2018 graduate is a college sophomore now. When he comes home, as he has unfortunately been, he would say, for the entire spring, not only will he not step into Bowie's building, he doesn't even want to drive on the parking lot. He so was made to feel as if he was dumb when he was there. He was made to feel as if he had no athletic talent. He was on the football team and also ran track. And in every way possible, the assistant principals, they were the worst. But also many of the teachers tried to make him, to turn him into a criminal, to accuse him of all sorts of misconduct. Fast forward to where he is.
Can I ask specifically for a second? General, what kind of things would they allege?
So when he was in the middle of exam period in his sophomore year, there were two assistant principals who are no longer at the school, but they were also involved with Kameron's case. They accused him of using another student's login information through the, whatever the AISD thing is that they log in. And they said that he used the other student's login information to send a sexually deviant series of emails to one of the white female teachers. And so they are interrogating him in the middle of his exam period. They would never explain to me what it was they claimed he did. And again, this is where I think an ombuds could be very useful. You know, when your mother is a law professor, you know there's a such thing as an open records law. And so I requested all of the information because they wouldn't give me anything, right? And of course, what they were claiming he did, isn't possible technologically, because I also happen to work on a college campus. So I went to some IT folks and said, can they prove that a student did something like this? I mean, my son didn't do it, but they were claiming they had proof. And then the second thing that I happen to know was that the information that they claimed they were able to get, you can only get if you have a search warrant. So, but I had to get the open records request to get the information to prove to them. But of course the case went away, you know, because once they knew I filed an open records request, then suddenly it went away. So that was one thing. The second thing is the group of boys were looking on a phone at pictures that they shouldn't have been looking at. Not my son's phone. They pull my son out and say that he was the one that received the pictures and was distributing the pictures. When it wasn't his phone, he didn't have anything to do with the pictures that the girls sent. And so my son
Let me ask a question. Were there other Caucasian students also involved?
Oh, there were, yeah.
And how were they treated? The same or different?
He was the one that was accused of causing it, even though the phone was not my son's phone. So I'm not sure how my son could be the one that allegedly was either distributing the pictures or showing the pictures when it was a white kid's phone. So that's just the, you know, those are the two. And then at the end of his senior year.
But what happened to the white kid in that situation?
Nothing, because the white kid, you know, he's a white kid. And that's one of the consistent things at Bowie is that if a white kid accuses a black kid of anything, the presumption is they're going to believe the white kid. No matter how outrageous the story may be, they believe the white kid. If they see 6 people in a crowd, they're going to pull out the black kid and say that the black kid did whatever it is they think was going wrong. You know, another example I'll use, although it involves my younger son, at some point, some microphone had been stolen and they use it to make announcements, and it was a sort of a portable mic. I couldn't quite follow that story. But for almost 2 weeks, they were accusing my son and a couple of other students of color of stealing the mic. And so the SROs, every time they'd show up at lunch and they would accuse them of stealing the mic. The only thing that made them back down was when the person that had stolen the mic started talking into the mic as the SROs were interrogating my son and his friends at lunch. So they couldn't obviously prove that my son stole the mic because the microphone was going off. And so they're looking at my son and his friends, and they had their hands up like this. And then you hear whoever it is that stole the mic. So again, it's always a presumption that if there's 6 or 7 people in a crowd, the Black students, particularly if they are Black males, are going to be the ones that are accused of doing something that's a crime.
Okay, we're going to transition a little bit. I'm going to throw a few things out there that I wanted to talk about. I spoke to Nelson earlier about being our cleanup hitter, about how to take all that we talked about today. I think Skip and certainly Cameron, everybody else asked about like the what's next issue. But I did want to say a few ideas I had too. I think we need to, we call it an ombudsman or someone to control this faucet before cases are referred to the police or the county attorney or the district attorney. I think there needs to be a special court set up for the schools to deal with students. So if and when there are issues that rise to the court level, that they're not taken out of the school to interrupt their day and just further, interfere with their education. They need to use team courts at the schools to deal with issues at the school that are kind of low-level stuff that happens all the time. They need to put, I think Cameron put up early on, and we all concur, they need to put the money into things like counseling and the ombudsman and the team court and social services and all these other things rather than SROs. So we want, the school districts to review all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to you, Nelson, for a little bit. Some of the things you've heard today, what's next for us? You've had the most, I think I would say, probably the closest relationship with Dr. Cruz and the school board over many years. What can we do as a group for people listening out there to help, help you, help us, help children? Anyway.
Right now, we're living in a historical moment in terms of policing in this country and racial injustice. We have an enormous opportunity. I haven't heard the word culture. When I look at AISD over the past 20 years, they have a major cultural problem. If you don't fix the cultural problem by reimagining education, as Skip said, you can't address these issues. If you got disparities in discipline, disparities in achievement, that's something bigger than just a system itself. That's also personnel. Right now, fortunately, we're in the midst of selecting a new superintendent. And that person must have the skills to begin to reimagine education. How do we treat all children the same? How do we create an environment where they're learning equally? But most of all, how do we teach understanding of differences in our population? Ironically, Black students are the increasing population in this city, but yet in the disparities and the discrepancies, they're at the highest point. So I think we got to redefine what we're talking about. The culture is stupid. The culture is broken. Regarding the names of the school confederacy, we need community people who are educated to be named after these schools, because you want folks to study who these people were. If you study an educator, guess what? You're going to learn about education. If you study a community servant, you're about being a good community person. We have a lot of work to do, but it starts with the culture. That means the next superintendent in this city has a major task. They're going to have the ability to talk to our community, make sure to enforce that message, and make sure we have a school board, which is elected, to also support that superintendent. But these are cultural problems. And I think in 2020, based on what we're seeing right now, we have an enormous opportunity. But we have to make sure we define it right. We have to reimagine education and make sure we have a very high standard. And we can't accept no for an answer anymore. We've got to get involved in terms of being more active publicly, just like with police issues. It doesn't get any more important than education. These are not really all legal problems. But if we can rally around having an effective school that addresses racism in its origin and teach people the importance of having respect and enforce those principles, we can change this equation. But nothing short than a cultural change will begin to address these issues.
Nelson, do you think, and I know you're already doing millions and millions and millions of things, but do you think it's possible for you to maybe see if you can put something like this on the school board, one of their next public sessions, to have some people come in and talk about this issue? Or do you think it'd be better to try and meet with, and by the way, there's somebody that got appointed or hired in the last year to deal with these issues. Am I right, Ms. Parks? Maybe you guys.
Yeah, they had Stephanie Stephanie
Stephanie.
Hall. Stephanie
Yes,
Hawley,
Dr. Hawley. Yes.
but equity officer.
She's awesome. What's her job? What is she?
She's the equity officer. She came from ACC. But I'm talking about a wilder stress. And I'm talking about the culture itself. And she's going to do a great job. But I think we have to be involved in reimagining the whole concept of education based on racial disparities and racial treatment. And I think right now I'm getting a lot of calls from parents about the next superintendent. We're talking about culture, who's out there, who's qualified, who has a good track record. The school board is open to that. But I'm looking at a huge change that involves looking at the culture itself. And I think Dr. Hawley is going to do well, but you know what? She's in a very difficult environment. So until we address the root cause of these problems, we really can't eradicate them. But sure, I'm about certainly to talk about what we can do to change the culture. Absolutely.
If I could add something about the culture, one of the things that I would also argue, and specifically for Bowie, but it's also sort of, we're seeing this generally in society, well, at least until before the protest, is that we have to get to a point where we stop the on the other hand-ism. There have to be some things that are just absolutely wrong. And so I'll cite a couple of quick examples involving Bowie and also Gariski. The use of the N-word in Bowie is rampant. You hear it in the hallways. My sons heard it at football practice. They heard it on the football field. The coaches heard it. The teachers heard it. No one ever did anything about it. We have to get to the point where we say that N-word, and I don't care what excuse a white student uses. I listen to rap music. Well, Black students use it, or my personal favorite. Well, I know a Black guy, and so I have a pass to use the word, because the pass thing seems to be all the rage these days. But AISD and the superintendent has to have a clear message that the use of that word should be treated just as harshly as the harsh penalties that are being imposed on our Black children and our brown children in AISD. I'll give a quick example. When my son transferred to Aikens, in his psychology class, on the syllabus, the teacher says, you're not using that word in this class. That sets a tone. That's the culture. If you want to shift the culture from a place where white students feel that they can say anything they want to Black students and can hang nooses and they can sit there for a week. If you want to change the culture, we have to move beyond this. Well, let's look on the other side. There is no other side. If the racists and the clans are on the other side, we don't need to care about what they're feeling and thinking.
Right, we got to have absolutes. We have to have absolutes, and some things just go without further discussion. Hey, Kameron, what do you think? What do you think of how do we handle that space between juvenile and adult that Marty had referred to earlier, and that you had alluded to, where between the ages of 16 and 21, those vulnerable years where suddenly we can really ostracize and ruin a kid by throwing him into the adult system when really he's just a kid and he hasn't yet really a fully formed brain full of anything yet. It's just formed.
Well, first I want to say, to Kameron, congratulations, on your accomplishments. I am horrified at what you experienced. I also wanted to congratulate your family. Professor Dickerson, you also. This is what we need to be doing, is to be able to be the voice. Yes, we have a culture. I'm hearing your story talking about the news. And then, today I'm also watching the national news, and I'm seeing how NASCAR, when they found a noose in a garage of one of their players, the first thing that they did was they said whoever did it is going to be banned for life. The whole community came behind and showed support for that driver, Ben Wallace. And, that's what needed to happen at Bowie. It's sort of like not having a justification of certain things like what we're talking about, because, there are certain things that are absolute, i.e., like the Confederate flag, I think back on it, I'm a proud graduate of the University of Texas. And I look back on when I was at school there, I remember having protests because we were trying to get those Confederate statues removed, and they didn't get removed during my time there, but they eventually got removed. But you got be able to have the voice to being able to stand up, that's how we can make things change. Now, to answer your question, Skip, it's sort of like, there's a trap that we get caught into. It seems like that when I talked about that 4-lane highway of these 4 different systems, they overlap and they happen at the same time. And so when I get a case, there's, from school, they've already, in many cases, they may be started, not maybe, but they started that administrative process, and that family is usually blindsided by those timetables. And whatever that they decide, I'm still dealing with the juvenile type of system and going back and forth. But one of the ways that I slow it down, if I'm able to, and we don't always have the resources, most of the time we don't have the resources, is that when I show up at that school, the first thing that school does when they see me and I say I'm such and such attorney is they shut it down. Oh, well, we need to call our attorneys,
Right.
And then we can have let's just say we can have a room to being able to talk, and we're able to deal with that situation instead of hiding about it. We don't have that. Now I like the idea of ombudsman, but I've seen that, I want to say have problems. Like we created one in the juvenile justice system, and then we got into a problem when I see what's happening with, in current events with our current administration on the federal level, is that you start firing all these OIG people, in a type of situation when they start doing what you created their positions to be able to do. And so I think as we as a community, when we get more people like Kameron, we get more people like Professor Dickerson, to tell the stories, and then people can say it's like, well, hey, that's happening at my school. That's not a good look. And so, yeah, we need to change the culture, but we need to be able to speak out, and then we can be able to talk about that and being able to say that, hey, this is not who we want to be. And unfortunately, and many times, it's going to be the result of, litigation, so thank you, Marty, for being part of that, but, that's how things get changed. AISD doesn't want to spend money paying their law firms to being able to address these type of issues. They'd rather be spending their money, as I said, on the, funding those police departments, or, paying for, when I see, so like I see at the football games at UT, like every Saturday when I see the head football coach that's surrounded by these state troopers, and I wonder every week, it's like, am I paying for that? Who's paying for that? And it's like, who needs that? What is that for? But it's just a visual that we get caught up and we want to being able to have. And so we got to take the police out of our schools, all right? And then on the adult side, that vulnerable population that you're talking about is that we've got to recognize and being ready to accept what I would say that, most states have accepted, and most, federal agencies and courts have accepted that children are children. You don't become an adult when you turn 17, that's one of the reasons why we don't let you go in and buy some alcohol at 17. And so until we start doing that and start demanding that, then we're going to be able to continue being able to have these challenges. So we do that, and we're going to make progress.
Hey, Martin, I've got to sign off. I got an early 5:30 in the morning, okay?
Well, I'm gonna try to hook in again tomorrow. I'm sorry, I had that problem, technical problem.
Well,
Hey,
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank everybody for participating. I want to let everybody know that I'll be calling upon you again. We're calling upon you again to put something a little bit more in what I call an action plan to get before AISD now. I'm a lawyer. I believe in the law. One of the things that we didn't mention early on, we talked about these other like Title VI and Title IX and 504. I filed a lawsuit. Our firm filed a lawsuit a couple of weeks ago against AISD on behalf of 5 girls who were raped at school. And the school district never did a Title IX investigation. They never did the investigation. Then, and you know why? It goes to the criminal justice system, becomes he said, she said, right? Typical. So we filed a lawsuit for that. And I look forward to when we can file more lawsuits. But I think what's special about the moment is we're outside the courtroom and we're in the court of public opinion. And we need to take advantage of that court of public opinion as much as we can. So once again, I'll be calling on everybody to help move this through AISD, because I will tell you, if we make it move a dent on AISD, and TEA is here, and the Texas Association of School Boards here who develop all the policies and procedures, if we make a mark here, it'll be affected all over the United States. Any last words from anybody?
Yeah, Marty, you said that your questions for Mr. Cruz. I followed a couple of stories and everything, and nobody, no school district around here knows where to go to get to file the paperwork that they need to file. You go to the school site or whatever, and you just go, and you never find anything.
That's important.
And also, the biggest question is, what do you have to do for a meeting? You know, after numerous emails to Dr. Cruz and staff and everything, and it's like years done passed, and you can't get a meeting. So if you can't get a meeting, how can you protect your child or voice your concerns in the school?
Well, that's our next move, Mr. Sneed, because I think we're all very, very committed to doing that. I'm going to sign off now. Actually, you brought up something I do want to do. For anybody who's out there listening, I'm deposing Dr. Cruz tomorrow. If you have any questions you'd like me to ask him, send them over, and Fernando, David, and I will process those. And if relevant and appropriate, we're going to ask him. We're going to ask him. And then the other related issue, you've heard a lot today from a lot of different people. You know, collectively, it's amazing how smart we are as a group. If you have any other suggestions to help deal with institutionalized racism at AISD, and once again, I'm using generically, but I'm going to say AISD, send that over too, because that's our next move. We're going to start moving on that school district and make it a better place for all our kids here in Central Texas. As they say, God bless America, right?
Bravo, bravo.
Hey, thank you to all the speakers. The less that David talks, the better the stream goes. And you guys did an excellent job of keeping him quiet.
Reimagine justice. Reimagine justice. Reimagine justice.